The night was warm, the kind that wraps around you without asking, carrying the smell of street food and the faint sound of music from somewhere far away. A small group had gathered at a quiet corner table in the back of a restaurant. Candles flickered on the table, their soft light touching the faces around it. Sandra Bullock was leaning forward, telling a story that had everyone smiling. She had just reached the part where the punchline would land, her laughter spilling out before she could even finish the sentence. But right then, Keanu Reeves glanced sideways at Ana de Armas. It wasn't a long look, just a small moment, a flicker of awareness in his eyes. Something about it wasn't casual. It was the kind of glance people share when they've both been carrying something unspoken, something too fragile for words. Ana was staring down at her glass, tracing the rim with her finger. The corners of her lips moved faintly, as if she was trying to smile but couldn't quite get there. Keanu's glance wasn't loud. It didn't interrupt the laughter or pull anyone else into it. But it carried a kind of quiet weight, the kind that made time slow for just a second. Sandra noticed, though she didn't let it show. She had been friends with Keanu for decades. She knew his silences as well as she knew her own voice. She also knew that Ana wasn't herself tonight. Earlier, before they came here, there had been a moment in the dressing room when Ana had stood in front of the mirror, holding her earrings but not putting them on. She had just stared at her own reflection, as if she didn't quite recognize the person looking back. The restaurant was warm, the laughter genuine, but under the table, Ana's hands were tense in her lap. Every time someone spoke to her, she nodded politely, but her eyes never fully met theirs. Keanu had been watching, not in a way that invaded, but in a way that noticed. "Ana?" Sandra said gently, pretending it was just part of the conversation. "You haven't touched your food." Ana lifted her head, her eyes soft but a little tired. "Oh, I'm fine," she said with a small smile that didn't last more than a breath. Keanu leaned slightly closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Fine" usually means not fine. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced toward the window, where rain had started to fall in slow drops. The glow of the streetlight outside made the water look like threads of gold. For a long moment, nobody spoke to her again, letting the conversation drift to safer topics. Sandra picked up the thread of her story, making the others laugh again, but her mind kept circling back to that brief look between Keanu and Ana. Something had happened. She could feel it like a change in the air. Keanu, still quiet, reached for the bottle of water and poured it into Ana's glass. She didn't ask for it, but she murmured, "Thank you," so softly it almost vanished under the hum of voices around them. Then, as Sandra's laughter reached its peak, Ana's hand trembled ever so slightly. It was quick, almost invisible, but Keanu saw it. He looked at her again, really looked. And this time, she didn't look away. For a second, something passed between them, something unspoken but clear. He knew. And she knew he knew. This was not going to be an ordinary night. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the glass windows like a soft, persistent reminder that the world beyond their table was still moving. Inside, the restaurant stayed warm and dim, the kind of place where conversations stretched and time felt slower. Ana sat back in her chair, her hands folded loosely in her lap. She wasn't cold, but she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, as if it could shield her from something only she felt. Sandra kept the conversation alive, telling small stories about the early days of her career, drawing chuckles from the group. But every now and then, her eyes flickered toward Ana, measuring her silence. Keanu stayed quiet. He had a way of letting moments breathe instead of filling them with noise. His gaze drifted between the table and the rain outside, but his awareness never left Ana. He knew she wasn't fine. He could sense it the way one feels a shift in air before a storm. "It's still early," Sandra said after a while, looking between them. "We could get dessert, or we could go for a walk?" She glanced toward the rain. "Might be nice, actually." Anna hesitated. "A walk? In this?" "In this," Sandra replied with a small smile. "Sometimes it helps." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "It's just water," he said, his voice calm but steady. "And sometimes getting rained on washes away more than you expect." Anna looked at him, her expression unreadable. She wanted to protest, to say she was too tired or that she had work tomorrow, but something in his tone made her pause. 10 minutes later, they were outside, the street glistening under the rain. The city was quieter now, the sound of drops on the pavement the only music. Sandra walked ahead for a moment, lifting her face to the sky, laughing softly as her hair dampened. Keanu stayed beside Anna, their steps slow, unhurried. "You've been quiet tonight," he said, his eyes fixed ahead instead of on her. Anna let out a small breath. "There's not much to say." "That's never true," he replied. They walked in silence for a moment longer, the rain settling into a steady rhythm. Finally, she said, "I got news this morning. Something about a project. Something I thought was mine." Her voice was steady, but her words felt like they carried weight. "It's not anymore." Keanu didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, letting the words settle between them. "That hurts," he said quietly, "especially when you've poured yourself into it." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for judgment or pity. There was none. Only understanding. Sandra turned back to them, smiling in the rain, but she slowed when she saw the way they were standing, close enough to feel each other's presence, quiet enough to hear more than just the rain. She didn't interrupt. Instead, she fell into step behind them, giving them space. Anna's voice dropped even lower. "It's not just about the project. It's the way it happened. Someone I trusted made the call, didn't even tell me." Keanu's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Betrayal cuts deeper than loss," he said. Her breath caught at the truth in his words. The rain fell harder now, blurring the streetlights, but neither of them moved to find shelter. There was something unspoken holding them there. And in that moment, Sandra, watching them from a few paces back, knew this night was only the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. The rain had eased into a mist by the time they reached the small park 2 blocks from the restaurant. The ground was dark and glistening, leaves shining under the lamplight, and the air carried that clean, just-rained smell. They followed the narrow stone path until it opened into a circle of benches around an old oak tree. Sandra walked ahead and sat down first, brushing raindrops from her hair. She watched them for a moment, her eyes softer now, her earlier energy replaced with something quieter. "Sit," she said, patting the bench beside her. But when they both stepped forward, she added, "No, Keanu, you sit with Anna over there. I'll give you two the nice view." She motioned to the opposite bench, facing the street beyond the park. Anna glanced at Sandra, then at Keanu. "You don't have to." "I know," Sandra interrupted gently, "but I want to." Reluctantly, Anna followed Keanu to the other bench. The wood was damp, but neither seemed to care. They sat with a small space between them, their breath visible in the cool night air. Keanu rested his elbows on his knees, his hands loosely clasped. "Sandra's right," he said after a moment. "Sometimes you need a different view." Anna tilted her head, her eyes following the distant movement of a bus turning the corner. I don't like being reminded that trust can vanish so easily." He turned to her. "Trust doesn't vanish," he said quietly. "It's broken. And breaking something takes action. It means someone made a choice." She frowned slightly, thinking about that. "So, You're saying it's not my fault. I'm saying someone else put that crack there, he replied. And you shouldn't carry their choice like it's yours. Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but she stayed silent. From across the circle, Sandra watched. She could see how Anna's shoulders had dropped, even if only a little, as if something heavy had shifted. She knew that Keanu wasn't just talking about work. He had that way of seeing past the surface without forcing you to admit what you weren't ready to say. A breeze rustled through the wet leaves above them. Anna shivered slightly, and Keanu noticed instantly. Without saying a word, he took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. You don't have to, she began. I know, he said softly, echoing Sandra's words from earlier. But I want to. She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time all evening, her eyes stayed there. In the background, Sandra leaned back on her bench, a faint smile touching her lips. She had seen enough in her life to recognize when something important was unfolding, even if neither of them realized it yet. And as the mist thickened again, Keanu and Anna sat in that quiet park, the rest of the world fading away, unaware that this conversation would change more than just the way they looked at each other. The mist turned back into light rain as they stayed on the bench. Anna pulled Keanu's jacket tighter, the fabric still warm from him. They didn't speak for a while. There was a strange comfort in the silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then, from across the street, came the sharp sound of raised voices. It wasn't the easy kind of laughter or banter. It was the strained, tense sound of an argument. Sandra sat up a little, glancing toward the source. Two young men were standing under a flickering streetlight, their posture aggressive, their movements jerky. One of them held something in his hand, waving it toward the other. Keanu's head turned instantly. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. Stay here, he said quietly to Anna. He stood, his movements steady and unhurried. Anna's hand tightened on the edge of the bench. Keanu. He gave her a small look. Just a second. Sandra had risen too, walking toward him. You don't know what's going on over there. Exactly, he said. And that's why I can't just sit here. He crossed the park path toward the street. The rain was light enough now that their voices carried clearly. As he approached, the taller man lowered his arm slightly, startled by the sudden presence of someone else. Evening, Keanu said, his tone calm but firm. Everything okay here? Mind your own business, the man muttered. Keanu didn't move closer. He simply kept his voice steady. If this is about money, or something that can wait, maybe you should walk away before you make a mistake you'll regret. Anna watched from the bench, her heart thudding. Sandra moved beside her, eyes sharp, but she didn't call out. She knew Keanu. He didn't escalate things unless he had no choice. The smaller man looked down, shifting uneasily. It's nothing, he said quickly. Let's just go. The taller one hesitated, then finally turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. Keanu stood still until they disappeared around the corner. Then he stepped back onto the park path, his pace slow, his face unreadable. What was that? Anna asked as he returned. Two people, he said simply, who needed someone to remind them they had a choice. She stared at him for a long moment. You didn't know them. You didn't even know what it was about. I didn't need to, he said. Sometimes it's enough to be a calm voice when everything's too loud. Sandra gave a small, knowing smile. And you wonder why people trust you without realizing it. Anna didn't speak, but she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just about the project she had lost. It was about the reminder that even when things fall apart, there are people who will still stand up, quietly, without asking for anything in return. The rain fell a little harder again, but none of them moved to leave. Something about this night felt unfinished, as if it was leading them toward a moment none of them had seen coming yet. The park was almost empty now, just the sound of rain brushing against leaves and the distant hum of a bus engine somewhere far away. Sandra had wandered a few steps toward the oak tree, running her fingers along its damp bark, giving Keanu and Anna a little more space without making it obvious. Anna sat on the bench with Keanu's jacket around her shoulders, her gaze fixed on the wet pavement. Her fingers toyed with the edge of the sleeve, twisting it without thinking. Keanu sat beside her, elbows on his knees, waiting. He wasn't the kind to push someone into speaking, but he had a way of making silence feel safe enough for words to surface. Finally, she spoke, quietly, like she wasn't sure she should say it out loud. It wasn't just about the project. It was about who took it from me. Keanu didn't move, didn't react sharply. Someone close? Her voice tightened. Someone I called a friend. Someone I defended more times than I can count. She let out a breath that shook slightly. They knew how much it meant to me. They knew it was the one thing that kept me going these past few months. He turned his head slightly toward her. And they still took it. She nodded, her eyes fixed on a faint ripple of water running down the path. Not just took it. They made sure it looked like I wasn't ready for it, like I didn't deserve it. For a moment, she thought she might break right there. But instead, she felt the quiet weight of his presence beside her. Solid, unjudging. That's not truth, he said finally. That's someone else's story, and you don't have to live in it. She blinked, her throat tightening. It's hard not to. When you start wondering if maybe they were right. Keanu shook his head. Doubt is loud when it's fed by betrayal. But it's not you. It's the echo of their choice. She swallowed, her eyes meeting his. You sound like you've been here before. He gave a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. More times than I'd like to admit. From a short distance away, Sandra watched them. She could see the way Anna's shoulders had eased just a little, and the way Keanu stayed so still, as if moving too quickly might break the fragile trust being built in that moment. Anna's voice dropped even lower. I almost walked away from everything today. Acting, my contracts, all of it. Keanu's eyes softened. And what stopped you? She hesitated, then said, This dinner. You and Sandra. I didn't want to cancel and have to explain why. I thought, maybe I could pretend to be fine for a night. Keanu's reply was quiet but certain. Sometimes pretending for a night is how you make it to tomorrow. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, one that carried more gratitude than she could say. And somewhere behind them, Sandra decided she had heard enough for now. She walked back toward them, brushing raindrops from her face. You two, she said lightly, look like you're solving the world's problems. Come on, let's find somewhere warm before we freeze. But as they stood, Anna realized something she hadn't expected. She didn't feel as heavy anymore. Not because the problem was gone, but because for the first time that day, she wasn't carrying it alone. They left the park slowly, their shoes splashing in shallow puddles. The rain had softened again, clinging to their hair and settling in the folds of their clothes. The city felt calmer now, as if the earlier tension had drained away with the water running toward the gutters. A small cafe sat on the corner, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. Sandra spotted it first. Perfect, she said, pushing open the door and holding it for them. The air inside smelled of coffee and cinnamon, the heat wrapping around them like a blanket. They found a table near the back, tucked away from the rest of the customers. A soft lamp glowed above them, casting a warm halo over the worn wooden table. For a while, they didn't talk much. Sandra ordered tea for everyone without asking. Keanu peeled the damp sleeves of his shirt back to his elbows. Anna let the warmth seep into her fingers as she wrapped them around the mug in front of her. Sandra broke the quiet first. You know, Anna, losing something doesn't mean it was the only thing worth having. Sometimes it's just the thing that was supposed to lead you to something else. Anna looked at her, her eyes heavy but attentive. What if the something else never comes? It always does, Sandra said softly. But it's almost never what you expect. Keanu leaned back in his chair, watching Anna carefully. You've been hit hard, but you're still here. You showed up tonight. You walked through the rain instead of going home. You think that's small, but it's not. It's how you stay standing when life tries to push you down. Anna's throat tightened. She blinked quickly, but her eyes still shimmered. I don't know if I can trust people the same way again. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. Then don't, he said simply. Trust actions, not promises. Trust the people who show up and stay. You'll see the difference. Something about the way he said it sank deeper than anything else had that night. Sandra smiled faintly, glancing between them. He's right, you know. And you're looking at two people who aren't going anywhere. Anna's lips curved into the smallest smile, fragile but real. I believe you, she said, and for the first time that night, she meant it. They stayed in that cafe for another hour, talking about nothing and everything. The rain stopped outside, leaving the streets shiny under the lamplight. When they finally stepped back into the night, the air was crisp and cool. As they walked toward the corner where they would part ways, Anna felt a strange calm settle over her. The loss was still there, but it no longer felt like the end. At the crosswalk, Sandra hugged her tightly, whispering something that only made her smile wider. Keanu didn't say anything. He just placed a steady hand on her shoulder for a moment before stepping back. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a dramatic speech. It was something better, an unspoken promise that she wasn't alone, and that even in the quiet moments there are people who will stand beside you without asking for anything in return. And sometimes, that is enough to start again.